Many of you may be thinking that yes, you can remember these things. However, in the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years, you might find that your cognitive abilities have begun to decline in a process known as aging. And slowly but surely, your memory will start to fade. My name is Eliana Glatt, and my project is The Testing Effect is a robust cognitive phenomenon that improves memory in neurologically impaired multiple sclerosis patients. In this population of individuals, the effects of aging are highly exacerbated. Currently, over 400,000 individuals suffer from the disease in the United States alone, with 200 individuals diagnosed every week. In this neurodegenerative disease, there's an inhibition of axonal transmission, or communication between neurons, due to wide-scale multiple plaques or lesions throughout the central nervous system. This can lead to severe cognitive dysfunctions, which mainly manifest in the memory domain, such as verbal, visual, and working memory issues. Unique to the memory profile of an MS patient is the fact that long-term memory dysfunction is seen in 40 to 65% of patients. Also, there's a primary retrieval deficit in the population. That means that the first time a patient learns information, it will not stick, the memory root will not be formed. In order to access this information later on, the individual must have learned the information more than once. Current interventions do not address this primary retrieval deficit and therefore are not effective. An interesting phenomenon found in healthy studies could provide a way to mediate this primary retrieval deficit. It's called the testing effect. It's a phenomenon in which retrieval practice or space testing improves subsequent memory. This means that you're practicing the material more than once and therefore studying the material more than once, which could mediate such a primary retrieval deficit. Theories behind why the testing effect could be present include the idea that it helps with the formation or enhancement of neural retrieval roots or memory traces within the brain. Also, there's the theory of transfer appropriate processing, or TAP. This means that if you're using the same processing skills in the initial learning condition as in the final recall test, such as quizzing yourself and having to provide something for a blank, you are improving your memory retention. In these healthy studies, 3 study conditions are usually used, and I use the same 3 in my study with the MS patients to maintain consistency. The first is called mastery study, or MR. It's similar to cramming in that you study for a period of time, taking no breaks, usually the night before a test. Spaced study, SR, is studying for a period of time, taking a break, and studying again. And space testing, or ST, this is the study condition which would highlight whether or not a testing effect is present, is the idea that you study for a period of time, take a break, test yourself back on that information, and then study it again. Only very recently has the testing effect been looked at in a multiple sclerosis population, and a recent pilot study in 2010 found that the testing effect is present after a short-term memory delay of 45 minutes. But I mentioned earlier that in 40 to 65% of patients, there's a long-term memory dysfunction. So what about long-term memory? I hypothesized that the testing effect would be present in the population of subjects after even a week delay, meaning that space testing would improve long-term memory dysfunction. This would be seen in that the patients would be able to recall more of the space-tested verbal pairs, which I'll explain later, than those of the other 2 studied conditions. To this effect, 10 multiple sclerosis patients with severe memory impairment were used from a multiple sclerosis database and given 48 verbal pair associate tests. A verbal pair associate test is made up of 2 words that are weakly associated, and in this case there were 48 of these pairs, across the 3 study conditions. And this would mark if there was a testing effect based on whether or not ST was more effective than the other 2 conditions. There were 2 experiments run, one with the 45-minute delay to solidify the previous study's results, and one with the 1-week delay to ascertain whether or not space testing would improve long-term memory dysfunction. The subject demographics included a median age of 48 years. 90.6% of the patients were female, which is actually not surprising considering the fact that the majority of the population of MS patients are female. The education was generally high school and above. OATAR, which is a measurement of adult reading ability, similar to an IQ test, measured in average intelligence for most of the subjects at 108.6. And a Chicago Multi-Scale Depression Inventory, or CMDI, again, unsurprisingly showed that these patients had a lower quality of life than that of healthy control. To be more specific about the actual test administration, the patients were each given a battery of unrelated cognitive tasks to provide for a cognitive profile of the individual, for other studies, and for this study to control different factors, made up of different calculation tasks and visual tasks, and also to provide for the delay between the initial learning condition and the final recall test. The actual testing effect assessment, as I mentioned before, is the verbal pair associate test, which included 144 trials, or 3 6-second presentations of each of the 48 verbal pairs across the 3 conditions. On the left is a list of weakly associated pairs that we found from a 1973 study that has been used in all the testing effects, usually healthy studies. And an example of a weakly associated pair would be ground to cold. A strongly associated pair would be hot to cold. If you use a strongly associated pair, such as opposites in this case, you cannot be sure whether or not the patient is remembering the fact that there was a strong association or if the intervention actually worked. On the right is a representation of the sequence in which the words were posted on the computer screen to the patients. An example of master study, or the cramming, would be ground cold, shown 3 times in succession with no breaks. An example of spaced study would be train black, shown once, twice, and 3 times in spaces of other words in between. An example of space testing condition, which was the condition that would highlight whether or not the testing effect was present, would be fancy point. So once in completed form, after a space of other words, they were tested on it, they had to provide coin. It was expected because of the primary retrieval deficit, they would not be able to remember coin the first time they were asked to, and they were given feedback anytime they weren't able to respond with the correct answer. And then again, a 3rd time, where they had to test themselves on the material. After all the tests, they were scored and input into a database wherein patient identity was kept confidential, and the proportions correct for each trial were calculated. An analysis of variance was also conducted for both the 45-minute delay and 1-week delay experiments to see if there were any significant differences between each of the 3 study conditions to one another. And there were, as expected in my hypothesis. So, on the left is a graph of the 45-minute delay results, and on the right of the 1-week delay results. On the x-axis are the 3 study conditions: master study, spacer study, retrieval practice, or space testing, the same thing. And on the y-axis is a proportions of verbal pairs accurately recalled. For the 45-minute delay, patients recalled 77.5% of the space tested words, while only 25% of the space study words and 15% of the master study words. In the 1-week delay, the pattern continued. However, overall, the amount of verbal pairs accurately recalled decreased just because the population would not be able to remember as much as they could from the 45-minute delay test. The space-tested verbal pairs were accurately recalled in 27.5% of the occurrences, while the patients could only recall 5% of the SR words and 1.25% of the master study words. Statistically, that meant that in both the 45-minute delay and 1-week delay experiments, the difference between the results in the space-tested conditions and the other 2 conditions was statistically significant, with a p-value less than 0.005. However, the difference between the results between the 2 restudy conditions, masked and space, was not significant. It was greater than 0.005 in both cases shown here and here. The results from the analysis of variance showed that eta squared, which is this n-looking symbol, which measures the effect of the variable on the final results, and the larger it is, specifically over 0.4, the greater importance there is to the variable change that you had. And since both values were greatly above 0.4, I knew that space testing was an important condition for the results, and it actually had a big effect on it. It was found from the results that space testing was the best memory strategy for every single patient, and the possibility that this was due to chance alone is less than 1 in a billion. It was also interesting to note that 90% of the patients could not recall a single master study word, verbal pair, and 60% of the patients couldn't recall a single spacer study verbal pair after the 1-week delay. But every single patient recalled a space-tested verbal pair, and many recalled 2 or more. The limitations of my study included the fact that it was a small sample size of only 10 patients. However, considering the fact that the population as a whole is not that great of a size, considering the fact that in America there's greater than 400,000 individuals in a population of over 300 million, we decided to conduct a power effect analysis before the study to see how many patients we would need for significant results. our other limitation was the fact that this was a behavioral study. The mechanisms such as physiological and chemical that underlie the testing effect in space testing are yet unknown. This study, as I mentioned, is a behavioral study, and it does provide significant evidence that you should use it as a memory study in MS populations. For future work, I'd like to look at neuroimaging techniques to understand the physiological and chemical underlyings of the space testing and testing effect. And I'd like to look at other neurologically impaired populations to see if, considering the fact that most of the cures are obviously not available right now in Alzheimer's, Huntington's, etc., to see if this intervention could improve quality of life now. And right now I'm working with my mentor on a pilot study in traumatic brain injury patients, such as those who are involved in car accidents or return from the Army. And it has showed similar results to this one, which is very exciting. In conclusion, my results supported my hypothesis that the testing effect could be present even after a long delay, therefore that space testing could improve long-term memory dysfunction. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, everyone is affected by aging, no matter if you're neurologically impaired or not. So everyone should be substituting their cramming strategies that they use as a default process with space testing. As simple as changing up how you memorize your grocery list, changing up how you memorize the phone numbers of a loved one, making sure that you remember everything as best you can in the future. I'd like to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Jim Samowski, and his assistant, Amanda Serino, for helping me acquire the patients and administer the tests, as I was not qualified to deal directly with the subjects, and my teachers at Livingston High School, and my peers and family for their support. References, any questions?